June 23rd, getting ahead of myself, meeting of the Nassau County Rent Guidelines Board. Let us begin with an introduction by the members, starting at the far end with the newest member.
Hi there. David Gallow,
Public member.
public member.
How you doing? MEEGAN, public member.
Barton, Melkonian, public member.
Barry Stein, landlord rep.
Rob RYCHLOWSKI, tenant rep.
Jeannetta Alexander, public member.
Cathryn HARRIS-MARCHESI, tenant member.
And I am Garrett Gray, I'm a public member. And the people at DHCR would kindly introduce themselves.
Yes, I'm James Ferrara, Associate Attorney. Michael Languili, Research and Analysis.
Salvatore, research analysis.
Labraya, research analysis.
Research analysis. Genhui, research analysis.
Jenkins-Krind, senior attorney, DHCR.
And the reason why we have all these people from DHCR here with us today is because the documentary information that is on the DHCR website has been posted and distributed to the members. So if any members of the board or any members of the public have any questions, they are here to assist us with that. Has everybody received a copy of the minutes from last meeting?
Yes.
Motion?
Second.
Motion by Cathryn, seconded by Jeannetta. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, the minutes are approved. Everybody who signed in is given approximately 3 minutes to speak. And we will begin with Charles Torsiello.
Hit the button yet. 3 minutes goes.
You got to convince James. He's the
3
timekeeper.
minutes goes very big. Dear ladies and gentlemen of the board, my name is Charlie Torsiello, a member of the LLC that owns 115 Atlantic Avenue in the village of Hempstead. I'm here tonight on behalf of all the excellent owners that we have in the village of Hempstead. Yes, there are many very good building owners in Hempstead that work hard to take good care of their buildings and provide a quality home for their tenants. I am not here representing those few landlords that maybe do not maintain their buildings as they should. We tend to think Hempstead is having many, many large landlords that own a lot of buildings, and we do. However, there are many single-family or single-building owner people in Hempstead where your guidelines significantly affect their ability to maintain their properties. When it's only one building, they don't have a lot of ability to move expenses. During these meetings, you may hear from Hempstead tenants living in improperly maintained buildings, and that's a shame. I do not support or condone landlords that do not maintain their buildings properly. However, this is not the venue where those issues should be adjudicated. A year or so back, this board decided to punish all the Hempstead landlords with zero guidelines. And you will see in the financial reports how that affected us. Why would you do that to us in passing zero guidelines? The board claimed that some owners were not making repairs, but why punish all the good landlords when there may be one or two? It's inappropriate, and I hope this board never does that again. The building department in the village of Hempstead is very responsive and should be the location people go when they have complaints. DHCR has a system where people can make complaints and they can adjudicate those lack of repairs. But this is not the place to do it. Regarding the financial impact that guidelines have on all building owners, from my presentation last week, the board members can clearly see how the guidelines passed over the 10 years don't nearly provide adequate increases to landlord as compared to CPI inflation, not even 1/3 of the difference. Coupled with the extraordinary expenses that we are facing now, which include insurance, everybody knows insurance is going up 20% or more, taxes are going up, the cost of getting contractors to do work is outrageous, and yet we are faced with a guideline of 1% or 2%. It's impossible to run the building. So specifically, if you look at the Hempstead income versus expenses reports for 2024, you will see that there has been a reduction of cash flow from operations in the Hempstead landlords of more than 20% from last year. Cash flow from operations in 23 was 10.27% compared to 8.31% in 2024. That's a reduction of 20% of cash flow in 1 year. which the 0-0 guidelines had an impact on that, and last year's guidelines of 1% or 2% have an effect on that. So I implore the board to take a close look at these expenses and pass guidelines that are reasonable based on the inflationary times we've been living with. At least 4% for 1 year and 6% for 2 years, at least. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Richard Rush.
Good evening, Chairman Gray and members of the board. And first, I'd like to start by congratulating you to your elevation to chair after many, many years of saying hello to Chairman Miller. I work with Rush Properties. We own and manage apartment buildings in Great Neck, Rockville Center, here in Lynbrook, and Hempstead. I'd like to discuss the findings of the recent survey that were just circulated for Nassau County ETPA apartments. The survey shows that operating expenses increased about 3.6%, with specific costs like insurance skyrocketing approximately 11%. And just to note that that's on the heels of last year's insurance increase of 19.5%. That's from last year's report, not this year's report, talking about last year. Income grew at a lower rate this year of only 2.2%. And according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics website, monthly inflation for the region, which includes Nassau County, has ranged between 3.4% to 4.2% so far this year. I would also like to remind the board that the 2.2% increase in rents is overstated because the reports include increases for market rent apartments in rent-stabilized buildings, because DHCR does not distinguish between these two types of apartments, even though it should. It should only present data for rent-stabilized apartments because that's what we're dealing with in these meetings. This past year, increases for rents of 1-year renewals were 1.5% and 2.5% for 2-year renewals. So without the market rate apartments, the increases for rent-stabilized apartments had to be less, especially because the apartments where tenants took a 2-year lease had no increase. So after you mix those in, rents on Nassau County rent-stabilized apartments had to increase less than 2% last year. So rents only increased around 2% for rent-stabilized apartments, where inflation was around 4%, which means that landlords lost ground, similar to how Charlie was discussing for Hempstead landlords. Because of this and recent increases in overall inflation, rent increases this year should be in this range at least. At a minimum, landlords should be able to keep pace with expenses. ETPA apartment buildings are at least 50 years old now, since the law applies to buildings built before 1973. They require a lot of repairs and maintenance. Landlords should not be discouraged from fixing and improving old buildings in order to provide quality living conditions for tenants. No or low guidelines, unfortunately, do just that. Leave landlords less money to invest in their buildings. That serves nobody's interest, especially tenants. As those who follow the market in the New York area, it's becoming very commonplace to see articles about how some landlords don't have enough money to fix up their buildings, and some buildings are actually being foreclosed upon by banks. In order to have a strong and vital rental market, the board should provide for appropriate, reasonable guidelines this year. It's also critical that the determination of the 2-year lease renewal guidelines be given close consideration. Many tenants choose 2-year renewal terms because of the huge benefit of locking in one rent for a 2-year period and skirting an increase after the first year. If expenses increase close to 4% for 2 years in a row, giving the landlords just one meager increase like 2.5% last year at the beginning of that 2-year period is unacceptable. That increase needs to be significantly higher, such as at least in the range of 8%. Thank you for this opportunity to address the board.
Thank you, Richard. Lynn Aronson.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I have something that I don't know if the landlords are finished making their presentations.
They're not.
They're not. Okay, then I'll wait, because the reason why I'm saying that is There's a particular banker which you'll name that could make it, but he wrote me an email on behalf of the landlords, so I'll wait then.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Aronson?
Good evening, Chairman of the Board and members of the Board. I have a speech here in front of me.
Just speak up, please, a little bit.
Speak into the mic.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something first on behalf of all tenants. I've been coming to these meetings for a few years now, and I've noticed that there's never tenants here, very few tenants, and there's always landlords here. And I come on behalf of all the tenants here, which bothers me because I feel like I'm fighting a battle for all these tenants and nobody's helping me. But I'm going to continue coming. So my name is Lynn Aronson. I'm 66 years old, and I've lived in a rent-stabilized building in Nassau County since 1977. I'm very fortunate that that had happened to me. But I'm here tonight just not for myself, but for many tenants who could not be here, whether they're seniors, people with disabilities, those without access for transportation, or they don't even know these meetings exist. Most of us live on a fixed income, and I understand landlords have their own issues, but we live on a fixed income. We're retired, we're aging, a lot of us are dealing with serious health issues. Myself, I am not dealing with serious health issues, but there's a tremendous amount of minorities that don't even have the ability or knowledge to come to these meetings to talk on behalf of tenants. So I'm trying to talk on behalf of all these tenants that I don't even know. There's a real financial difference between tenants in stabilized apartments and landlords. Landlords may be facing rising costs, taxes, insurance, maintenance, but they have assets, they have equity, they have income-producing properties. People like myself, we live on paychecks day to day, we have no assets, we rely on our paychecks weekly by weekly. Landlords, they are not living paycheck to paycheck. We are. Tenants don't benefit from property value increases or tax deductions. We feel every dollar of a rent hike increase immediately and directly. A small increase can mean the difference between groceries, rent, food, or medicine. The Emergency Tenant Act protection is in place for this imbalance to provide stability and affordability to those who need it most, not to guarantee increasing profits. We are not asking for handouts. We are asking for fairness. We are asking for stability. I respectfully urge the board to vote for a 0% rate, vote for 1 and 2 year leases. I myself have always been a 2-year lease. I listen to the landlords talk, and I don't understand a lot of what they say because I am just a tenant. I am educated but don't understand all the statistics. Our communities cannot withstand any more increases. Too many of us are already on the brink of just making it by. Thank you for your time, your attention, for listening to me as a tenant.
Thank you, Lynn. Steve PADYK.
Hello. So on the recent report that was issued, the summary page, the expenses from 2022 to 2023 increased 4.9%. The rent increase for that period was 2% for a 1-year lease and 3.5% for a 2-year lease. So that would be roughly a deficit in percentage, cost increase to rent increase of 2.9%. From 23 to 24, the expenses increased according to this 3.6%, and the rent increase was a 1% for a 1-year lease, a 2% for a 2-year lease, and 0% for the Village of Hempstead, which contains most of the rent-stabilized apartments. So again, that would equate to a 2.6% deficit. So for those 2 years alone, it's a 5.5% deficit for a rent stabilization. As I mentioned to you, if you have a fully rent stabilized building, you're not making it. People, the rents are so low, and the increase is on a 1% for a guy that pays $734.58 for a studio apartment is $7. It's intolerable. So I am asking for a 5% rent increase for a 1 year and an 8% for a 2 year. And again, I want to remind the board in Long Beach and Freeport, how I stated how real estate taxes have increased, and my insurance went up 11% with a $50,000 deductible. We all know that this schedule for the rents is inaccurate because it includes market rent apartments. We are solely here for rent stabilization. That's why we gave up our evening, okay? Nothing else. I don't understand why that can't be plucked out with computers today, but it never is, and it distorts the bottom line. And the reason I'm saying that is because next Monday, this gentleman there from Hofstra is going to say, landlords are making a profit, but we're here for rent stabilization, to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Michael Schneider.
Good evening. My name is Michael Schneer. I live at 25 Franklin Boulevard in Long Beach. I've been the de facto president of Long Beach Tenants Association for at least 10 years now, and I've been attending meetings in the Nassau County Rent Guidelines Board since the late 90s. It's important to note, as I have in previous testimonies, that the number of rent-stabilized units in Nassau County over the years has been greatly reduced by a number of factors. According to statistics I've collected from DHCR, in 2001, there were 11,940 ETPA units in Nassau County. As of today, that number has been reduced to 6,841, which calculates to a 43% reduction in the housing stock of rent-stabilized units over a 23-year period. There has been no effort to increase the number, and the 2019 rent laws did nothing to re-regulate the many apartments that were deregulated, nor is anyone building any new affordable units. As I stated in my testimonies in Long Beach and Freeport, a large number of the remaining regulated apartments have legal regulated rents which exceed what are considered to be current fair market rates. Many of these tenants are offered preferential rents, which are lower than the legally regulated rents. Upon examining HCR's 2004 Office of Rent Administration annual report, it should be noted, and I did provide this to everybody at the last two meetings, everybody on the board. It should be noted that out of a total of 921,536 registered rent-stabilized units statewide, 290,162 are classified as having preferential rents. That's nearly 1 out of every 3 rent-stabilized units in the state. Those figures are for 2023 and 2024, which is the last year in this report. While HCR does break down the total number of rent-stabilized units by county, they do not break down the number of preferential rents by county. I was able to link to HCR's website through the links that are in this flyer here and sort their statewide data to determine that out of Nassau County's 6,841 regulated apartments, 2,616 are currently paying preferential rents, or almost 38% of the remaining regulated stock of rent apartments. Page 4 of the handout does have the first page of that spreadsheet, which I took the time to put together from that website. There are 140 pages that I have previously stated I'd be willing to provide to anybody on the board, and yet, other than Cathryn and Rob, none of the rest of the board members have sent me an email, even though I provided my email address, requesting the data, which I'm a little disappointed in because it is relevant data. If you look at this page alone, you'll note that the numbers in the middle column are legally regulated rents, whereas the numbers in the right column are the corresponding preferential rents for those apartments. Now, we know that those apartments are in Nassau. We don't know if they're in Great Neck, Long Beach, Hempstead. It's probably a mixture of everything, but you know, that data is not available. Considering the income and expenses report indicates that over a 27-year period, the total cost-to-income ratio remains pretty consistent through all the years. In conclusion, it should be noted that any number higher than a 0% increase would only serve to hurt tenants that can afford it the least, especially at the current time with so many tenants struggling to keep up with rent due to inflation. The evidence shows the majority of ETPA apartments have rents that are at or above fair market rates. I therefore would hope that any increase would be minimal.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. And again, between now and when you guys deliberate next week, can very easily provide anybody up there with that data. All you got to do is send an email and I'll send you the spreadsheet.
Thank you. Shelly Knoll.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Shelly Knoll.
Just speak up a little bit so I get into the mic. Thank you.
My name is Shelly Knoll, and I speak on behalf of Executive Towers at Lido, a 276-unit apartment building located in Long Beach, New York. I've been coming to these meetings for many, many years. However, I have not often spoken. Today, I feel compelled to address the board, certainly not because I enjoy public speaking, which I don't, but because we've had only one voice on the board for the last 3 years. Although it is a strong voice, a sincere voice, it is still only one voice with one vote. The housing law changes of 2019 dramatically altered and has had far-reaching negative financial effects on all building owners of rent-stabilized buildings. It has abolished the ability to exempt any rent-stabilized apartment. If an apartment was rent-stabilized on June 15, 2019, it will remain stabilized until the end of time. The rent-stabilized housing market is and shall remain stable because of these laws. A win for tenants and the affordable rental market, but a hardship for owners who are burdened with the numerous restrictions associated with rent-stabilized apartments. The 2019 changes eliminated the 20% vacancy increase as well as the longevity bonus. Another one for tenants in keeping rents low while having a tremendous effect on owners' ability to play catch-up on rents that are historically well below market. In addition, individual apartment improvements are needed the most on units becoming vacant after an extended tenancy. Long-term tenancies result in big-time expenses when these units are vacated. These new laws significantly reduce the amount of money owners can recoup on necessary improvements to individual apartments. Some owners will opt to keep units vacant rather than pay money on apartments in need of costly repairs. When you have a tenant that has occupied a unit for 20+ years, just about everything in that unit needs to be replaced. Kitchens, bathrooms, floors, appliances, you name it. With today's costs, fully renovating one bathroom alone can exceed $20,000. And it is not unusual to spend $45,000 on units where plumbing and electrical work factor in. Putting this kind of money into units where the rent is barely $1,000 a month, or into units where rents can be in excess of $1,000 below market rate, with yearly increases averaging between 1% to 2%, make these improvements unsustainable. I can go on and on about the recent changes in the housing laws that have successfully put into place tenant protections, but at the same time are at the detriment of an owner's ability to properly maintain their buildings. Affordable housing is a must for our communities, and no one is here to argue that. Recognition of what is necessary to financially maintain our buildings, to continue to provide safe and affordable housing, is what we ask the board to seriously consider when you vote next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Barry. Stein.
Okay, good evening. I'd like to pass this around. A particular gentleman named Vince Giovinco, who's the Executive Vice President of Flushing Bank. Vince could make it, but he was going to testify in terms of the condition of the rent-stabilized market in terms of the financing, things that I've been saying a long time. I'd like to pass this around and then read it, if I may, into the minutes. some of the other information which I could pass on, I guess, tomorrow over in Hempstead. But so Vince Giovinco, who's the executive vice president of Flushing Bank, also a CPA. He comes originally from Kimco, and then he was the senior vice president of New York Community Bank, now Flagstar. And if anyone knows more about financing rent-stabilized apartments, Vince does. Unfortunately, what's happened, NYCB, which was the largest in the New York area of financing rent-stabilized apartments, is no longer in the market, and if it wasn't for an injection of $1 billion from certain people on the merger from Flagstar, they would be out of business. But having said that, let me read an email that Vince sent to me at my request since he couldn't make it here. It says, Barry, I wanted to give you some quick thoughts regarding the current state of the rent-regulated housing stock in the 5 boroughs of New York City, and also, I may add, Nassau County, which I'm experienced in. The 2019 rent regulations have had a devastating effect on the asset group. What was once the trophy asset group has now become the source of major concern for owners, tenants, lenders like myself. And we all know the changes in the laws have caused the rental income for these buildings to be virtually flatlined, since there is no more upside potential in the rents. In addition, the restrictive requirements to recoup any capital expenditures have also negatively impacted the cash flow of these buildings. And by the way, just to make a point, it's the cash flow that pays the bills and not the increased value of the asset, if I may add. Since these laws have been in place since 2019, there has also been a significant increase in the real estate taxes on real estate in New York City. In the last 10 years, we have seen real estate taxes increase from a range of 5 to 7% of gross rent rolls to upwards of 25% or more of the gross income. This has had a huge impact on the net operating income of these buildings. In addition, insurance costs have more than doubled over the last few years, and the water and sewer charges increased have been at historical highs. So the lack of decent rent increases coupled with these additional expenses growing exponentially has led to a significant decrease in values of the class of the housing stock. By the way, I'll explain it later what he's going to talk about. Capitalization rates, which are the barometer of, capitalization rates, which are the barometer for decrease in values of this class of housing stock. Capitalization rates, which are the barometer, have increased from a range of 4 to 6% to 7 to 9% for the asset class. What I wanted to qualify is when a capitalization rate goes up, the value goes down. It's a division process. The higher the cap rate, the lower the value. When cap rates go down, the values go up. He's going to explain that in the free market, cap rates used to be higher than rent-stabilized apartments. Now the cap rates of rent-stabilized apartments have increased, which have decreased the values. Let me just continue. Faced with increased expenses, lower cash flow, and decreasing asset values, we are seeing an exodus of investment from the 5 boroughs of New York City, and may add also Long Island. Many long-term owners are now leaving this space and investing in neighborhood states. Those landlords making a go of it have decided to no longer lease vacant units. When a unit becomes available, because it does not make sense to invest any capital into these units. Adding to all of this is the increased burden of larger debt service payments, as a lower rate debt that was originated years ago has more than doubled over the last few years. In other words, going back 3 years ago, the rates were somewhere in the 3s, the heights maybe 3.8, 3.9%. Now the rates, which have come down a little bit, are closer to 6.5%. For rent-stabilized apartments. So that doubling of the increase in the debt service has caused a substantial problem in the financing arena. From an underwriting perspective, lenders have grown wary of this asset class. Since rent levels are not increasing, expenses are increasing at record levels and values are decreasing significantly. Many lenders are no longer able to support this asset class. Essentially, you are lending money based on an asset value today, which will only decrease in the future. Over time, a property owner will have more difficulty being able to meet their debt service requirements as the years go on. And then let me just continue and finish. The end result will be a degradation of the housing stock, which we are now seeing evidence of already, since there is no more incentive to invest in these types of buildings. The laws that were enacted in 2019, which were to preserve affordable housing, has had the opposite effect. The quality of the housing has decreased, and there are fewer affordable units available to rent. Unless something changes to correct the ill effects of these rent regulators, the future of rent-regulated housing stock will be bleak at best. I'll hand out some more information that supports that. In fact, I'll do it now, but I just wanted to read Vince's. Okay, so
I wanted to make a
one, you can either take a copy. These are industry scenarios and the increase of what's happening in the housing stock in the market. And this also is from New York Magazine, so you might want to take one and pass it on. Anyways, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Catherine?
I wanted to make a comment. I know Vince very well.
I know you do.
He's a close friend of ours, and Barry has been his mentor for many years. But in here, nowhere they're talking about the New York City market.
But I said,
nowhere.
Excuse me, if you want, it's also, I know that, but I also said Long Island, and I'm a little more experienced than you in finance.
If you're reading this, what I'm saying is nowhere in here does Mr. Giovenco say anything about Long Island or Nassau County. And as we are all aware, in New York City, and when we're talking about some of the banks and so on, and the $1 billion that came out of, when private equity got involved in New York City, that was very specific to New York City, not Long Island. And private equity went in and made a bet on something with banks that were underfunded, and I forget who it was from, Ireland.
I didn't hear. What equity was invested? I didn't hear what you said.
I said private equity went in and bought up a lot of the different buildings, and then they ended up on being undercapitalized. There were smaller banks, and it ended up being who was it from Ireland that came in?
That doesn't affect the financing of what lenders are going through now on Long Island and New York.
But this is about New York City.
And I may add, I noticed you mentioned New York, but there were many times when New York was addressing certain guidelines, it was brought up certain things about New York. So not only does it New York, which is what he said, but Flushing Bank lends on Long Island. Ridgewood Savings Bank lends on Long Island. TD Bank lends on Long Island. They are all now, TD Bank will not lend on rent-stabilized apartments. Ridgewood Savings Bank is extremely conservative, and I can go into it in detail, maybe I will next week, on stabilized apartments. Chase Bank, very, very conservative on stabilized apartments.
Actually,
the bottom line is...
If I could just interrupt for a second, what I think Catherine's point is, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's the lawyer.
But I can't hear. Say it again.
It's the lawyer in us, where you are reading Vince's email, which is very well written, and you're adding your own opinion on it as it relates to the Long Island market. He in this email is only talking about New York City. You are saying, and Long Island is comparable. That's your opinion, but it's not contained within the four corners of this email.
Okay.
I think that's her.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Okay, any other questions, comments from the board?
Pardon me? I'm fine.
Okay.
Barry's okay.
All right, he's all right. All right, our next meeting, everyone, is tomorrow in Hempstead Nathan Bennett Pavilion, which is next to Hempstead Town Hall. After that, we have the vote on Monday at the Nassau County Legislative Chambers. So I hope to see you tomorrow. If not, enjoy the heat. And can I have a motion?
Motion to...
Second.
Say dismiss. Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.
Say it again?
Cathryn. I was waiting
Oh,
to
I'm
jump on
sorry.
this.
Okay,
Police
thank
in
you.
New York City.